Well, good morning. And as usual, this is the day the Lord's made. We'll rejoice and be glad in it. You know, many churches today are practicing a new philosophy of easy religion. However, as we'll see in today's study of John chapter 2, verses 13 to the end of the chapter, this is not a new philosophy. It's been going on for over 2,000 years. However, I believe that without even realizing it, the modern day church has slipped into this posture of easy religion. I believe it's because pastors, maybe in frustration of trying to keep people to come to their services, have tried to make it easy as possible for them to come. I've often said that if you want to draw a crowd, what you need to do is to pull the pews out and put recliners and offer free food, meal with your, with the service, and while the service is going on, by the way, so they don't have to stay more than an hour. And, have wonderful performances up there by the worship team and the pastor and all of this. And, of course, don't receive an offering because, that scares people off. Just put a box in the back if they want to, for tips or whatever. That's stupid. We're here to worship God. That should be the theme song of the church. But oftentimes it's not. This has been expanded, I'll put it that way, to the easy believism of modern Christianity. I believe that Jesus' response to this today would be the same as it was when he walked on earth back then. Let's look at the subject of easy religion or easy believism, either way. First of all, we'll notice it was the setting is the Jewish Passover. In verse 13, says, "Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. As many things of God and man perverts. God tries to do something for us that is great, and man comes along and tears it up. They had made the Passover simply another religious ritual. It didn't mean anything to them. They would come because they always had. I've often said the last three words of the last phrase of the church is, we've never done it that way before. Not only would they come because they always had, they didn't have the heart of worship, but the heart of a ritual. It was just going through the motions. There was one of it simply was one of the things that they went through. By the way, one of the things that bothered me about Curtis Baptist Church, or while I was at Curtis Baptist Church, was in their bylaws. They have the Lord's Supper, or as they called it, communion, must be on the first Sunday of each month. When you do that, it simply becomes, or became, in my humble opinion, a ritual, and lost some of its significance. We should never have the Lord's Supper as a ritual. It needs to be a wow factor. And it wasn't quite that way, I don't believe, at CBC. Now, if you disagree with me, we can disagree agreeably, but that's just my opinion. I want you to notice, though, even Jesus came every year. He, his mothers, his brothers, and his mother, his brothers, and his disciples all went to the Passover every year. He had gone to every Passover since that famous time at age 12. We find in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 and 42, where his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to the custom of the feast. And then we see in verses 43 and 49 through 49, and you know how he got left behind and impressed the temple leaders with being able to answer their questions. Now, the Passover was when they sacrificed the Passover lamb. It was symbolic of the time when the death angel passed over the children of Israel because they had sacrificed the lamb and put the blood on the doorposts and the lintels of their houses and killed all the firstborn of the Egyptians. Jesus, you need to understand, is our Passover lamb. According to 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, it says, "For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us." This is what they were representing, the coming Messiah being sacrificed for us, shedding his blood for us. So we see that it was the Jews' Passover. Now notice the priest's temple. In verse 14, "And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business." What Jesus found was an enterprise, not worship. They sold sacrificial animals to those who had traveled from a far-off distance or another town. And an enterprising affair, by the way. It was convenience to those coming to the Passover and very profitable to the merchants and the priests. First of all, people didn't have to bring an animal. They didn't have to bring their animal. But let me back up for just a second and explain to you what was really going on. Because, you know, Jesus said that you've made my house a den of thieves. Well, what was happening is they would have the livestock there, the sheep and doves and all these different things that were supposed to be sacrificed. And a person would come in and buy one of those and give it to the priest. The priest would take it in to the holy place, not the Holy of Holies, but the holy place. And supposedly it was supposed to sacrifice it. But what they would do is basically take it around and bring it back and put it back in the pen and sell it again. So they were making money off of it and robbing God of the sacrifice. So that's the reason Jesus took this stand. Now then, back to the theme of this teaching, easy religion or easy believism. Like I said, the people didn't have to bring their animal. They didn't have to bring the one that they had raised, they had fed, they had tended to, they labored over, they watched over, maybe even the pet. The one of value to them, they didn't have to bring. They could buy a substitute. They didn't have to lead it or herd it or drive it or carry the animal. There was no work involved. Just go up and give some money. Let me ask you this. What do you consider a sacrifice? I want you to think about it for just a moment. You see, here again, in my opinion, and I believe the scriptures will bear truth to this, to sacrifice is giving up something dear to you. Notice also, the priests as well as the merchants were getting rich. They were stealing from God, as I said a while ago. Listen to Matthew chapter 21, verse 13, which talks of this. He said, and he said to them, it's written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. You know, we need to be careful about our attitude toward giving. A lot of people give it out of duress or give it out of, well, you know, I can give this much because it won't hurt me to give this much. That's not an offering. By the way, let me just throw this in. It won't cost you anything. The first 10% of everything that you bring in, that comes into you, belongs to God. It already belongs to Him. You need to give it to Him because it's His. It belongs to Him. Then if you want to give something over and above that, that's an offering. An offering is a sacrifice. Hope you understand that. But now we need to look at the anger of Christ. In verses 15 and 16 it says, when he had made a whip of cords, he drove them out of the temple, that is, the money changers and all the merchants and all this stuff. He ran them out of the temple, drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the changers' money, overthrew the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. He was upset because the priests had introduced or allowed easy religion in the temple. The outer court of the temple was called the court of the Gentiles. And it's where the merchants had set up business. No one entered the temple without going through the court of the Gentiles. So what's bad about this? First of all, the noise of the bargaining merchants haggling over the price of their animals and things would be disturbing. The noise also disturbed the chanting or singing of the Levites and kept the worshipers from hearing the prayers of the priests. Now, the animals were necessary for sacrifice. The worshipers, however, ought to have brought their own sacrifice, excuse me, instead of buying one at the temple, as I've already explained. This made their religion easy. They didn't care about desecration of the temple or disturbing the worshipers. They just wanted quick and easy. Then there's the money changers. Outside the temple, the only coins that could be used were Roman coins because Rome ruled over Jerusalem. But inside the temple, the only coins that could be used was the shekel of the sanctuary. That you find that in Exodus chapter 30, verse 13. To use the Roman coins with Caesar's image on it was considered desecration of the temple. The money changers would exchange the Roman coins for the shekel of the sanctuary for a fee, of course. And the average person didn't want to keep the shekels because they weren't able to use them anywhere else, which would only be accepted there in the temple. Therefore, it was the philosophy of let's get by with the least possible amount. And by the way, that is another mark of easy religion. It's what they were after. Just as today, many are looking for the smallest amount to put in the offering plate, or the smallest amount of work to be done. One of the things that upset me, and I've been on many building projects, churches, and one of the things that upsets me is the attitude a lot of times of the men and women when they come into work. Let's get this done as quick as we can so that we can get on with our own business. I don't know that God likes that. The Lord didn't approve of these programs resulting in convenience here as we've studied. Ease of worship. He was angry. He made a whip. He used it to chase out the peddlers of easy religion outside the temple. It greatly disturbed Jesus. And I think it still does. When we make his worship easy and convenient to disregard of the sacredness of his house being a house of prayer. By the way, it's odd that, I shouldn't say odd, but I think it's very pointed that Jesus called his house a house of prayer. In modern day church, prayer is very small in comparison to everything else that goes on. All you got to do is have a Wednesday night prayer meeting and you see how many people show up. Most churches have dropped the Wednesday night prayer meeting because they didn't have anybody in attendance. I want you to notice, it wasn't easy for Jesus Christ. Verses 19 through 22, Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple in 3 days and I'll raise it up." Destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll raise it up. Now, then the Jews said, and this shows how their thinking was, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you'll raise it up in 3 days? But verse 21 explains it. It says he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead on the 3rd day, the disciples remembered that he said this to them, and they believed the scriptures and the word which Jesus had said. The Jews' focus was completely off of the Messiah, the promised one, the one coming. They didn't recognize him when he came because they were looking at rules and regulations. They weren't looking for him to come. I think in our society today, even in our churches today, people aren't looking for Jesus to come. They're looking for rules and regulations. If we can check this off our list, everything's okay. Jesus is looking for a relationship. In closing, let me say this. I see nothing wrong with a ministry selling CDs or DVDs in the church to support their ministry. They're not robbing God. It's a way that we can show our support for their ministry. Now, here again, if you disagree with me, we can disagree agreeably because this isn't covered in Scripture. The only place anything close to it is what we just studied. And you can see that Jesus was upset because they were making it easy. It should not be a doctrine in the church. No selling of merchandise or anything like that. By the way, the shirt that I'm wearing, I bought in the church. Now, let me ask you, where's your heart? That's what counts. Do you catch yourself saying things like, oh, it's Sunday, we have to go to church? Or, let's get it over with so we can do our own thing. How about stand and sing for worship? Oh, that's too tiring. Did you realize that the worship leader made us stand through all the song service? By the way, the church that I planted here in Colorado, they didn't know you could sit down and sing. I never told them they could. I started out as the worship leader as well as pastor. And then when we did bring in a worship leader, I told him we always sing, or we always stand to sing. I had a lot of people say, do you realize that young man told us or kept us standing the whole time? Well, their attitude's wrong. Let me ask you, what's your attitude to these things? Do you look at going to church as something you have to check off your list, or to see what God's got in store? You know, the Pharisees did all the right things. They could check their list off, man, just great. They did all the right things. But all they did was for the wrong reasons. And Jesus called them a bunch of whitewashed tombs, pretty on the outside, but full of dead men's bones. Think about it. And here again, if you want to talk to me about it, give me a call. Or write me an email or snail mail or whatever. My information is going to follow here in just a moment. But I'd like to hear from you. Well, until next time, God bless. Amen.